Alright. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another halaqah with Hikam al-Ata'iyya, the Book of Illuminations. I'm your host, Rami, in Grace's absence. And, Grace has been gone for, we don't know for how many days now, we've lost track. But I've decided to keep a survival log in her absence. So I'll just read to you guys day by day how it's been going. Day 1. We've been left to our own devices, Sheikh and I. This is going to be a fun week. Just two guys hanging out together in the house. What could go wrong? Day 2. There was a woman who used to live here, but I can't seem to remember her name. Greta? Gertrude? Anyway, she must not have done anything important if I can't remember. Day 3. We've run out of food and don't know how to use the DoorDash app. Whoever is reading this, just don't judge us. Oso's meat was particularly tender, though I think Sheikh preferred cocoa. The entire process was quite simple as they didn't put up much of a fight. The pelts should keep us warm in the winter. Day 4. We've run out of fresh meat. We had no choice but to resort to raiding the neighbors' homes. Unfortunately, there were witnesses, but luckily the basement is able to muffle out any screams. Otherwise, they tend to keep us up at night, even when we ask them very politely to stay quiet while we sleep. On the other hand, however, I guess we have more fresh meat. Day 5. We had a delicious barbecue today. This meal wasn't as easy to prepare, however. Next time I'll be sure to slice the Achilles heel before unchaining anyone. Day 6.
Do you want to hear this?
Coke Zero reserves are running dangerously low.
Oh no, that's a problem.
I've noticed Sheikh stockpiling some under his desk, seemingly concerned about the inevitable shortage. I caught him giving me a suspicious glare the last time I grabbed one from the fridge. Sheikh doesn't like to talk to me much anymore. I often find him staring off into the distance, lost in contemplation, perhaps wondering how much longer his Coke supplies will last. As a result, I've had to find the companionship with Connie. That's what I named PlayStation. She keeps me company in the long hours of the night when the neighbors' screams are keeping me up. Day 7. A man arrived today, claiming to be Sheikh's brother and going by the name Tariq. So long as he never goes into the basement or covets any of the cokes, it might not hurt to keep him around. He very much enjoyed the stew we made today, remarking that he'd never tasted anything quite like it. Despite his kindness, I must resist the urge to form a friendship, as there are only so many neighbors left. Day 8. It's the day of the halaqah. We've managed to hold up pretty well this week, with Sheikh alive and most of the dogs. I'm confident things will continue to go swimmingly. Alhamdulillah.
This was the introduction?
That was the introduction to
Alhamdulillah.
Hikam al-Ata'iyya. So enjoy everyone the halaqah, and maybe we'll publish this one day.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Joe, you can get on editing it.
After this riveting introduction and very realistic narrative of our survival in Grace's absence, or near survival. Okay. توكلنا على الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. I think Rami, I don't know, maybe he should reconsider his career in Islamic law and write horror novels. I think there's a talent that's waiting to be discovered here, but I'm not sure what. All right, so I think we finished number 20, and we are starting number 21, which actually, it's an extension of number 20. Okay. If for people who, I'm not sure if the tafsir halaqas or if these halaqas have more followers, and I'm not sure if people who are, there are some people who are following these halaqas but have not followed the tafsir halaqas. But if you haven't listened to the tafsir, and if you are following al-Hikam al-Ata'iyya, I really strongly recommend that you make it a commitment to go through the tafsir. Knowing God's word, knowing Allah's revelation intimately, is an exposure to Iman that naturally delivers you to where Al-Hikam al-Ata'iyya starts. And it is this intimate relationship with God's revealed word is irreplaceable and very necessary. Okay. So you recall from number 20 the essential, the core idea that you push yourself and you do not allow the perception or the appearance of achievement to make you satisfied with what you've reached, that it is consistently that there must be consistently a drive and a perseverance in the path. And you also remember the core idea of, because this will come back to us in a later principle, the core idea of rububiyyah tawallat ubudiyyah, that this drive, this path, and the adab of the seeker must rest on the core understanding that al-ubudiyyah lillah, everything in creation, as a matter of fact, whether it acknowledges the maker or disavows the maker, whether it accepts or doesn't accept, is in a state of ubudiyyah. by the sheer fact that that's where it all originates, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that those who are in a state of ubudiyyah without volition, without choice, are indeed in a constant state of dhikr. Their very existence is a fulfillment of dhikrullah, is a fulfillment of Allah's remembrance. When volition exists, you have also the choice to withdraw or to deny your dhikr. So, although your ubudiyyah is a state of fact, a reality, you are always owned by God, a servant of God, by your very existence. Whether you accept it or don't accept it, you are fulfilling God's purpose in creation. But what you do have a choice in is whether to engage in dhikrullah, whether to acknowledge your indebtedness to Allah, your gratitude to Allah, whether to acknowledge the remembrance of Allah or not. But the ubudiyyah for a seeker and for a Muslim who understands the stages of Islam, Iman, Ihsan, you also understand that you are traveling from ubudiyyah to rububiyyah. And as we said in last halaqah, that rububiyyah it's a multi-layered concept, but for our purposes now, let's just say it is godliness, where you are ridding yourselves of everything but the divine substance in you. And you are crafting and shaping yourself in accordance with as-sifat al-ilahiyya, the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the ultimate goal is to be an embodiment of the divine, a walking, living embodiment of the divine. And as we see, the later principles will build upon this. But it is exactly this understanding that consistently denies you the overreaching of thinking that, well, I've arrived wherever, because as abd, the potential of rububiyyah is literally limitless. There are always leagues of distance that you could go in fulfillment of the state of rububiyyah. In fact, one of the often taught phrases in this principle and in later principle, I think it's principle number 30, but inshallah we'll get there. But that al-ubudiyyah fil Islam ظاهرة والحرية باطنها, that the باطن العبودية, or I think the phrase goes ظاهره العبودية وباطنه الحرية. Yeah, ظاهره العبودية وباطنه الحرية. That in fact, if you truly understand what ubudiyyah to Allah is, the state of godliness is a liberation. It's an emancipation. And so that the very concept of hurriya, of emancipation and liberation, is a natural extension of humans' ubudiyya to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so much of what we talk about in this path is to be liberated from your vulnerabilities, to be liberated from your fears, liberated from your anxieties, liberated from your lowliness vis-a-vis yourself or vis-a-vis all others. And including, of course, especially in our modern world, material things. So, and that is where this, unfortunately, again, when or how did this happen in Islamic history? What were the circumstances? What was the relationship of the rise of the Wahhabi movement, the Akhbari movement, the Salafi movement? Why was that discourse that existed in Islamic civilization for centuries, what used to be accepted as a for-granted proposition that ubudiyya in Islam is zahiruha, that this is only the surface reality, but the batinuha, the truth of Islam is a state of hurriya, that it is in fact to deliver an insan al-hur. And it is important because a lot of Muslims have been influenced by colonial Orientalist narratives that any talk about hurriya in Islam is a product of the modern period and a product of Western influence. Well, that's just historically wrong. Discourses on al-hurriya, batin al-ubudiyya fil Islam is an old medieval discourse, and as we will see soon, inshallah, Ibn Ata, or even commentaries on Ibn Ata, numerous medieval commentaries discuss this proposition. But it is critical for the seeker, because as we will see, that if you are ultimately on this path and you are still plagued by fears, you're still plagued by anxieties, you're still plagued by your habits, you are unable to break the chains of your own habits and your own weaknesses. And I would go even beyond this and say, if you are indeed disempowered, or your disempowerment is not a mathematical equation of who has how much power. Disempowerment is an internal reality that is within. So if you are in fact disempowered, you will remain in a state of ubudiyya, and you will never be in a state of rububiyyah. And as we'll see, this is talked about. So this is all just an important reminder of what we've talked about surrounding principle number 20, and as we get on to 21, because it is a furtherance on the same theme. So this point of adab says, first the Arabic, طلبك منه اتهام له وطلبك له غيبة منك عنه وطلبك لغيره لقلة حيائك منه وطلبك من غيره لوجود بعدك عنه. Okay, so towards the end of the halaqah, I mentioned this these categories of طلبك منه طلبك له طلبك لغيره and طلبك من غيره, but I didn't elaborate upon them because I knew that we'd be dealing with them in proper with principle 21. So the basic translation: your demand of God, okay, I don't like this, but anyway, your demand of God is accusing God of not fulfilling God's promise. Your seeking God is due to your absence from God. Your seeking someone else is due to immodesty towards God. Your looking for someone else is because of your distance from God. Let me see the translation in this book. This is the translated by Victor Danner. It's a more academic translation, so sometimes it's more tight. So this is a translation in this one. You're requesting God, again, no, it's a problem. You're requesting God is suspecting God. Your seeking God is due to your absence from God. Your seeking someone else is because of your immodesty towards God. Your requesting someone else is on account of your distance from God. Okay, so what is, let's open this translation. So here it's alerting you to four nuanced states when you are supplicating God to give you. That's طلبك منه. When you ask God to give you, that's طلبك منه. The second, طلبك له, is when you are seeking God because you do not realize God. You do not feel God. You are not aware of God. So you are in a state where you say, I am drawn, or my goal is to seek after God. Okay. طلبك لغيره is to seek after someone other than God. طلبك من غيره is to ask someone other than God. So you have these four, right? You are asking God, you are asking for God, you are asking someone other than God, and you are asking, or you are seeking after someone other than God. Obviously, the last two are the least challenging, right? The last two is that it's basically saying, if you say to yourself, you know, I would be so happy if only my superior, if only whoever is a point of either greed or a point of admiration for you, my moral state would be at balance. I would be a happy, serene, tranquil human being if only I would win the acceptance, the approval of the praise of other than God, that's understandable. It's telling you, then be aware that, and what that is described as qillat haya, as immodest. Here, haya is, and we don't have an equivalent in the English language because it's not really bashfulness, it's not really embarrassment, it is not really just modesty, but it is sort of saying that if you are seeking after anyone but God, it is a form of impoliteness towards God. In this context, haya means that you're being impolite because it's ultimately God who is in charge. Okay, and number 4 again is not as challenging. وَطَلَبُكَ مِنْ غَيْرِهِ, that if you ask someone other than God, it's because you are at a distance from God. Is that you are asking someone other than God because you have not internalized, you do not truly believe that God is in charge, and so that is why it's described as bu'adaka anhu, that you are at a distance from God. These are the last two, and they're the least challenging. The first two are the ones that perhaps need some commentary. So, talabuka minhu, that if you ask God, ittihamun lah, that at this stage you are as if accusing God of something. It's a form of accusation. Now, an accusation of what? An accusation that God doesn't have your best interest in mind, and that you need to navigate and steer your best interest in your discourse with God. God, please give me XYZ because I'm not at the stage where I trust that you have my best interest in mind without me saying anything about it. So that is the sense of ittihamun lah, that you are ittihamun lahu, that you are accusing God of this issue. Talabuka lahu, seeking after God. Why is it described as ghaybatun minka anhu? Because those who are still at the stage of seeking after God, it is because their being, their sense of being still exists. So you still identify your primary object of identification is indeed yourself. What I feel, what I think, what I want, what I desire, and you have not yet realized or come to the realization that the self compared to God, it is as if it evaporates and vanishes. The self, the wujud al-nafs, as long as that self exists, then there always is the me and the God. And the me and the God is always an acknowledgement that there is a distance between the me and the God. When the me, the I, is completely integrated in Sufi language, diluted, it literally they describe it as dawaban, so that its desires, its wants, its desires, its emotions, its thoughts is thoroughly contingent on the divine. That's when the distance between the me and the divine starts shrinking. Now, one of the big issues in Sufi narratives, in Sufi history, is it possible for anyone, as Hallaj did, for instance, and the consequences for Hallaj were rather very tragic because he was executed, to claim that the self has been diluted completely, that it no longer exists. And as Hallaj says in his poetry, something very shocking to modern Muslims, but he says when I desire, God desires, and when إذا شئت شاء وإن شاء شئت, that if I desire, God desires, and if God desires, I desire. What Hallaj would say is that my journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has completely evaporated my sense of the self. This is a stage, regardless of all, because you'll find an enormous amount of discourses and debates and literature. The volume of literature is truly enormous about, but for the seeker, these four categories is not to tell you that any of them are necessarily wrong. These are not moral condemnations, but it is telling you what you must be conscientious of in the journey. So, as I seek God, I must always be aware, and this is where I think it's healthy, where I think that it doesn't get into dangerous grounds. Where's the me? And to what extent am I projecting the me onto God? Because one of the most dangerous things in the journeys to the divine is that those who either do not have good stewardship, they don't have good teachers, or they don't have teachers at all, and what they end up worshipping in that journey towards the divine is nothing but the self, because they projected the self. And this is the biggest challenge in all projects of love, is that we often start out saying we want, or we are on a journey to love X, but the very powerful tendency for human beings is to project the self onto the object of what they love and end up loving the self. And so this is even a greater concern and a greater worry, because the journey of ubudiyya doesn't result in any type of liberation or emancipation or freedom, but in fact a further ubudiyya, or a further enslavement to the self. And so these four categories are constantly sort of like monitors or things to think about and worry about very seriously. I am praying to God for X, Y, and Z. What does that inform me about my iman? If I don't trust God to give me what is best for me, why is that? What is my understanding of God? Do I believe, for instance, do I suspect God is mad at me? Do I believe I've committed sins that might disqualify me from being the recipient of what is best for me? هل أنا مقصر؟ Am I in the wrong vis-a-vis my relationship to Allah? And that is why I feel the need to drive, to steer the wheel, to obtain certain objectives, because in reality, if I'm really being truthful with myself, I don't really believe that I deserve for God to give me the best. This is if you're really honest with yourself, because a lot of people will say, no, I just deserve it. Well, but that completely misses the point of this point of adab on 21. You cannot just assume, yeah, I trust God because I deserve to get the best. Then you failed in the pedagogy of that point. The entire pedagogy, it's an educational point, is to interrogate yourself. Why is it that you are holding on to the steering wheel? And why is it that you still are not at a point of trust where you let go of the steering wheel and say, God, steer me to where you want me to go? Now, similarly, that if you find that you are, and here, the point number, the third category, when you seek after someone else, what they had in mind in this in particular is to warn students from falling in the trap and the fallacy of the journey towards God becoming a journey towards the idolizing your teacher. That's the point, the core point of number 3, is that when he says طلبك لغيره لقلة حيائك منه, that it is because you're impolite, you're rude. What they would drill into a student is that think very hard. Is it that you want God's approval, or do you want your teacher's approval? Is it that you seek to be in good standing with God, or do you seek to be in good standing with your teacher, with your tariqah, with your fellow students? So that is the pedagogical point of number 3. The pedagogical point of number 4, that's the easiest, is that, well, if you find you are eager to ask other than God, and with the full acknowledgement that we human beings, we will of course be forced to ask other than God. None of us are islands. And all of us, if you, from everything like saying, hand me a glass of water, to, I don't know, in your family, can you make me a cup of tea, to, anything from onwards and upwards. You are always engaging and asking. But that is not, it's not telling you to stop doing that. That is bad students who think what it's telling you is refrain from asking, because, and notice here, it says, وطلبك من غيره لوجود بعدك عنه, that it's not telling you stop doing it, because if you stop doing it, that's not going to achieve your nearness to God. It's telling you if you ask anyone else, it is because you are at a distance from God. It is not saying that by refraining from asking anyone else, you will become closer to God. No. The point is pedagogical. The point is to get you to reflect. Well, number one, I mean, I remember a teacher said the point is to instill in all proper students an i'timad on nafs, to rely on yourself. You know, if as I remember a teacher said a long time ago, that if you can answer a question yourself, it is a sign that you are of intellectual laziness to ask. To rely on oneself from everything, from getting a glass of water to seeking knowledge, that ethic is there, and that it is as that you never take your relationships with others for granted when you start expecting service. But that is the subsidiary point, or the secondary point. The primary point is that whenever you reflect upon your interactions with other human beings, and you ask yourself in these interactions, to what extent am I morally, psychologically, spiritually? It is one thing to ask for help because you need the help, but it's another when you find yourself spiritually dependent or emotionally dependent on the person that you are asking aid from. So, to what extent are your interactions and reliance on other human beings in fact an indication, or most frequently, not an indication, but most frequently has led to an alienation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So in most extreme circumstances, and this is extreme, but people who find themselves in real predicament, for instance, the field that I work in and I study and I teach, refugee law. Refugees, displaced human beings, become desperate, and they become truly, their entire thought process is hinged on how can they find aid from fellow human beings. Sociologically, what results from that is a distance from Allah. That when you are constantly, your very survival is contingent on another human being delivering aid to you, what actually sociologically happens is that you start losing a connection with God, a trust in God. You start, in fact, losing a sense of the godly at all. And that is when you have figures like Umar ibn Khattab said that if poverty was a man, I would have killed it. Desperation is the antithesis of faith, and that is why a truly pious society does not put people in a state of desperation, because desperation is the playground of the devil, and God is, or the idea of God is nowhere more alienated than with desperate people. So this principle is not condemning people who are in desperate circumstances, but it is inviting the pedagogical point. Be cognizant as you interact and as you depend on others, to what extent this is an actual alienation from God, two, an indication of an alienation from God. To what extent is it really an evidence that you worry more about the pleasure of your boss than the truth of your relationship with Allah? You've noticed I've talked about 1, 3, and 4, and I skipped number 2 because 2 needs a bit more elaboration. So, similarly, it is a pedagogical point. As you sit and you say, I am seeking after Allah, in your dhikr, in your wird, in your hadra, the persistent question that you interrogate yourself about is, to what extent is myself at a distance from the God that I seek? And more importantly, to what extent is the self being projected onto the God that I seek? This is why you will find, sadly, you will find people who could be pious, but you will, for instance, find in real life that these same pious people, when angered, when slighted, when offended, they quickly jump to the position of equating their desire for their rage and desire for vengeance with Allah's will. So you see this all the time. You could find someone and say, MashaAllah, this is such a good prayer, but when it comes, for instance, to this person offending this person's family, insulting this person's family, let's say, or let's take an example of someone that I'm thinking of. A father whose daughter was in a divorce proceedings. This same father that seemed to be such a pious person suddenly is equating his vengeful feelings and his, going out for maximum outrage, equating that, and you wonder, you tell yourself, where is Allah in this? Where Allah is exactly the pedagogy of number 2 has been violated. It is one of the hardest things in this path, is to, as a student, to constantly say to the self, you are a servant of Allah, you are a Abdullah, and the path is to become a Rabbani, to become godly. But I know you, and I know that you will, that the temptation, the risk in there is that you, instead of you becoming godly through subservience to God, that you would claim godliness through God's subservience to you. And that is why Number two, I mean, the exercises in different tariqas, I mean, they range very widely. You know, whether it's, you know, exercises that teachers, a lot of tariqas, the teacher will have, like, it's a very similar to the system of TAs in graduate school, teacher assistants. And quite often, you'll find a tariqa where the teacher assistant will be assigned individual sessions with students where they go through particular interrogations about where the self is, and precisely to address that. And I mean, whether the solution is through programs of fasting and awrad, or it ranges very widely. But it is, because we are human beings, it is one of the most challenging pedagogies. Okay. But there is a point that is often drilled, an ultimate point that is often drilled into a student about 21. That this path, if you are successful in this path, you get to a point where truly what your passion is, what your desire, what steers inside of you, is constantly expressed through the phrase, may Allah do what Allah wills. يَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ. In other words, you've reached a point where you truly, you've disciplined yourself, where you say, you know, whatever Allah brings is good. And I am at peace with whatever Allah brings. So, but interestingly here, so you often get the question, well, so does this mean if I am successful and I reach that stage, a critical point, it is not, they're not telling you stop desiring things. They're telling you, if you are successful in this path, this will happen naturally. So for people who say, you know, I'm not going to ask Allah for anything in order to be successful in this path, well, that's not the point. Because even if you don't ask Allah for it, if it's in your heart, then you can't win in this path through a fallacy. So for instance, I cannot be desiring X job, but I say I'm not going to ask Allah in my dua because it is in my heart. I'm desiring it. What they're saying is, if you are successful in this path, what you will find that what you are drawn to, what you want, what you actually desire, what steers in your heart, is simply what Allah wills. And you are when you look inside your heart, you find no other passion in there. But however, they tell you that the one, and I've always found this very fascinating, the one passion that should always survive this dynamic, this process, these pedagogies, this tariqa, is talabul ma'rifah, the passion to learn. That, because there is no limit to knowledge. And knowledge is, in fact, and this is a part of this whole discourse that is fascinating, that knowledge is, in fact, the manifestation of emancipation. Is that if you are truly, if you've attained the stage of al-hurriya, that it's not that you know everything, but that you have an limitless passion for knowing. And that is why, by the way, in a lot of Sufi literature, and for instance, the best example of this, if you look into Tafsir al-Sufiya, like Tafsir al-Jilani, for instance, the way they imagine heaven and the way they interpret all the ayat about heaven, heaven is a heaven of knowledge. And knowledge achieves nearness to Allah. That all the descriptions of rivers and huris and that these are all metaphors for luminosity and understanding and knowledge. And all you have to do is open up Tafsir al-Jilani and just read any of his commentary about any passage in the Quran about Al-Jannah or the pleasures of Al-Firdaus and you'll see an example of that. Okay, have I... okay, two quick points. Another big takeaway from this is that as long as the culmination of these four principles, what it's really telling you in essence is that as long as you have lowly desires, you have egotistic contaminations. So does this mean that the takeaway from this discourse, if your desires are not lowly desires, so for instance they're altruistic desires, they are desires, as I talked about in the khutbah, of nahwa and ibat, are these not lowly desires? Yes, the answer is that these are not lowly desires. So the takeaway is targeted at the concept of, and lowly desires are desires that are self-serving. They're selfish desires. They're desires about the me, what I want, and what I want regardless of anything else. These are egotistic contaminations that will impede the path. The other big point, and it's sort of elaborated upon and developed in further adab, is remember that these are pedagogies not just for self-improvement, but for a irtiqa, what they call qurb al-mushahada, for reaching the stage in your development of mushahada. And what mushahada means, this is from the same word where ashhad, to witness, is to have a direct knowledge of God that is the result of a direct, intimate experience with God, that, as we've said repeatedly, is individual and specific to each individual. That qurb al-mushahada, that special individual where you have a state of certitude about God, a certitude that does not is not navigated through evidence and indications and rational arguments, but through a direct state of experience. And as I, for our purposes, as I said, like near-death experiences that transform human beings, and the thing that you always encounter when you read the literature on near-death experiences is that it always defies description. People always struggle to describe it or to even give you a sense of what it meant. Okay, before we move on, let me see if I forgot anything. Covered this. A point that sort of one of the concepts in Sufi literature, and that is often discussed when, or introduced, let's say, around principle number 21, is the idea of mu'anasa. I don't know if you've ever heard that word or that concept, but in Islamic literature, you would be struck by how many texts have been written on the idea of mu'anasa. And for instance, one of the names that is used, Arabic names, is Inas, and it comes from that same idea. And which is, mu'anasa is like what keeps you, it's a form, it's like socialization, but what keeps you company, what creates your social happiness, right? So, and inas, the word inas means that the idea of that who keeps people socially happy. You interact with, and through that interaction, you are happy. Now, so even in colloquial Arabic, in Egyptian, they use the word wanis. Wanis means that who keeps you company and engages you socially and makes you happy, right? Now, so part of our state as human beings is that we seek oneness, we seek social company that makes us content, that fights our sense of loneliness, perhaps distracts us from our anxieties, perhaps distracts us from our worries. That's what oneness is that you are seeking an engagement with an other for that social bonding experience that affirms you, that validates you, that fights off your anxieties, your worries, your concerns, and so on. And one of the key pedagogies in this journey is to learn al-mu'anasa billah, because it is something that is learned, that you sit and spend time with Allah, and the same emotions that you get from the company of those who can validate you, can take away your worries, can entertain you. The exact same practice, feelings, passions is now not experienced just with other human beings, but experienced with God. In this stage of training, you will often hear students will tell you quite often that I was told to withdraw from al-mu'anasa bil-ghayr, that to lessen the practice of finding company with other human beings, to sacrifice that. In other words, to go in a state of uzla or khalwa, isolation. And it is often methodologically a part of this dynamic, is that because we human beings it comes to us naturally, and we are so dependent on being validated by other human beings, being, our loneliness, our anxieties, being defeated through the practice of bonding with others, that you withdraw into isolation and you learn al-mu'anasa billah, that you find genuine pleasure in spending company with Allah. Now, this practice, by the way, have resulted in some of the most unbelievable poetry in Sufism. The practice of what transpires as you learn your uns billah. And uns billah is that your pleasure, your happiness, your loneliness is defeated. That in fact you spend time with Allah and you feel that you are in all the company that you can possibly desire. Describing that has resulted in some of the most beautiful poetry that you can ever read. And it is a very important step. And as I think most would agree, that in fact, it is often a prerequisite to truly falling in love with Allah. Before you truly, a lot of people say, oh, I love God. 99.9% of the time, it's BS. They don't love God. They love themselves. And God is whatever they project themselves unto God. So God and me are the same, and that's why I love God. Because God is there to rubber stamp whatever I want. That's how the vast human, But this dynamic is that first you learn the ecstasy, the pleasure of God's company, before you learn what it means to fall in love with God. Because what they call the futuhat, the illuminations, the revelations that occur in a state of mu'anasa that's the sir, that's the secret. Meaning that's the thing that often, in this journey you can't describe and you can't explain and you can't. It is. Some of the mabadi' that we'll talk about, some of the other principles, aphorisms that we'll talk about, do elaborate on the concept of mu'anasa, but mu'anasa is often left to it's often left to the teacher, to an actual living teacher, because it it's, I mean, you can read poetry about it, and it's the poetry is inspirational, but it doesn't help in teaching you the achievement itself. So, anyway, you'll hear me talk more about al-uns billah, but 21 is where it's introduced, and where the practice of al-uns billah begins. That you start doing taking your baby steps towards al-uns billah, which often involves periods of isolation and withdrawal from social interactions if possible, or vows of silence, or definitely vows of non-argumentation, that you are absolutely, I mean, you are absolutely forbidden from engaging in any type of argument, especially arguments where you vindicate yourself, and you go on vows for this for 6 months, depending on the teacher, of course, and so on and so forth. Okay. What time is it?
8:42.
8:42. Okay, let's go to 22. Okay. ما من نفس تبديه إلا وله قدر فيك يمضيه. It's very short, but very powerful. ما من نفس تبديه إلا وله قدر فيك يمضيه. So, the basic translation: not a breath do you exhale unless it is according to a degree which will come forth. Okay, close, but it obviously loses a lot of the poetry of it. But okay, so what it's saying is, ما من نفس تبديه. A student must reflect and be cognizant of the fact that while those who don't believe in God, they believe that existence is happenstance, and there is no purpose, there is no point, there is no object, it's just a set of coincidences. But the core of believing, as I said before, in an engaged and interested God, because as I said many times before, and especially when we were doing the tafsir, that systems of religious belief that thought of deities as either deities that are engaged in these wars of gods, godly affairs, battling one another out, or the idea of deities that are disinterested, deities that create and they basically say, okay, and this was very much in part, or deities that were interested for a period of time, like the Jewish God, interested when there were prophets, but became disinterested, or deities that passed the taklif, passed the agency to a class like rabbis, a rabbinic class, or a clerical class, or a clerical class, and the God withdrew from the scene and said, okay, now I'm not in charge, it's my priests who are in charge, or it's my church that is in charge, or my sages who are in charge, or no one is in charge. That was very, very common. And as we said in the tafsir many times, that Islam, and one of the essential points, central points of the Quran, is that no, that this is a God who is أقرب إليكم من حبل الوريد وهو معكم أينما كنتم, that God is closer to you than yourself, that God is with you wherever you are, that this is an interested and engaged God, a God who continues to be involved. And what flowed from that and is that also that, and as the Quran says in numerous occasions and places, and go back to the tafsir if you want full elaborations on this, is that this is a God that navigates and drives things, and in fact sustains and maintains creation itself by active engagement all the time. And you know what all the time means is a huge issue in Islamic theology and Islamic philosophy. But why am I saying all of that? Is that part of this journey is to be fully cognizant that there is no breath that you take except that, as it says, إِلَّا وَلَهُ قَدَرٌ فِيكَ يُمْضِيهِ, except that you are acting out, you are embodying and enforcing and implementing God's active will. So if, as I've heard said many times, if what creeps into your psyche, what creeps into your nafs is a sense of insecurity or lack of conviction that in fact your very existence, your waking day, every day that you wake up, that you are carrying out a divine purpose, you will veer off the path. And if you don't serve Allah, if you are not cognizant of serving Allah's purpose, what comes naturally is that the demonic will seep in. But being driven, saying every breath, I am a part of Allah's will, is critical for the path of al-mu'anasa. It's critical for the path of finding company with Allah and in Allah. You will not understand God, because part of this whole journey is understanding the divine. You will not understand God. Remember, I told you that the thing that was overwhelming is the extent of God's mercy and God's compassion. But what I didn't tell you is that this entire journey and repeated illuminations is the extent to which God is, it's idiotic, but maybe that helps. The extent to which God is cognizant and truly knowledgeable of all. And so that nothing is just an off chance or an aberration, or nothing is not monitored. I mean, it's in our age, it is possible to build computers that would be aware of every leaf that falls in a forest, right? It is possible. We now can know that it is possible to create these types of systems. But I doubt these systems would, so the idea that a deity that is cognizant of all is not that far removed from the imagination of the modern human being. But purposeness, with and it truly endless, boundless beauty and mercy and compassion is what's difficult for the modern human being to imagine. But so to be constantly mindful of the fact of that. The other thing that is emphasized was 22. Is I'll say it in Arabic first. That al-anfasu amana الأنفاس أمانة وحق لله. And this أمانة تقتضي منه حقوقا لازمة من حقوق لا يقوم بها. That's the Arabic phrasing. That every breath is literally a trust that you owe Allah. And that because every breath is a trust that you owe Allah, every breath entails an obligation, a haqq, a right, that you owe Allah. Now, I don't, when I was a child, I was asthmatic. And when you're asthmatic, I was severely asthmatic, and you could truly become aware of the extent to which every breath is not an entitlement, when you're struggling to just breathe. And I've often, in my own journey, I've often would remember, well, in part, I still had asthma attacks when I was going through the journey, but even when the asthma attack stopped, I would often just remember, and you let, in the state of dhikr, as you're doing your awrad and you're doing your dhikr, you think of if every breath is a gift and every breath entails is a trust. It is a different way of seeing the self and hearing the self, hearing your own breathing, than, and one of the exercises that we would do dhikr, dhikr ismullah, that you repeat Allah's name as you're in synchronicity with your own breathing. And it's one of the most amazing experiences, as you listening to your own breathing and repeating Allah, and then you realize that Allah's name in itself is a form of inhalation and exhalation. Anyway, we're getting into methodologies and ways that are, but it is the cleansing and the empowering and the full awareness of that you are already interacting with Allah in the very process of breathing. That we take our breathing for granted, but breathing is it's like a lot of music, or certain types of, I can't say a lot of music today, but anyway, certain types of music. It is as if repeating the rhythm of creation, and the very logic. It is an unlocking. It is as if you are learning to unlock the rhythm of creation and the rhythm decreed by the Creator. Anyway, okay. So, yeah, and finally was 22, that the whole idea of amana, of course, is that every breath, you are not just discharging Allah's will, but you are also coming, you are expending, you are withdrawing from your bank account of life on earth. And you are constantly withdrawing from that bank account, from your and so as they say, إن كانت الأنفاس معدودة فما بالك بالخطوات. So if you think of the implications of constantly withdrawing from this bank account of breathing, and whether in fact you are discharging your obligations towards God as you are constantly withdrawing. But this is sort of like the one of the obvious points that is always mentioned, but it's anyway. Okay, what time is it now?
Almost 9.
What we go usually till 1.
I don't know.
What time did we stop last time?
Like 9:30.
9:30. Okay, so maybe we get beyond 2 principles today, I think. Okay, let's go to 23 then. Before we do that, let me just make sure I didn't forget anything. This was number, the one about breathing. Oh no, hold on. Oh, no, okay, no, I didn't forget anything at all. Let's go to 23 then. So 23. لا تترقب فروغ الأغيار فإن ذلك يقطعك عن وجود المراقبة له فيما هو مقيمك فيه. This is very close to a principle that we've talked about, but I'll tell you the difference. So 23, first basic translation. Do not expect to be free from distractions of otherness, for that will cut you off from attentiveness to God in the state in which God has placed you. لا تترقب فروغ الأغيار فإن ذلك يقطعك عن وجود المراقبة له فيما هو مقيمك فيه. Remember when we talked about a previous principle, and I said that one of the fallacies is to say, well, I will start the journey, or I will seek God, or I will work to be more religious or more devout when I have more time. And I said that as a principle, that it's not just this, but in all matters, because say, well, when I have more time, I will clean my room, or I will that the problem with this attitude is you don't know if you have more time. And in fact, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that you always assume that this is the last day of your life, and you work on the assumption that you don't have more time. And so how you can maximize the good, how you can maximize the service, how you can maximize the ibadah in the circumstances that Allah has put you in. One of the great points of adab with Allah is that you never take Allah's will for granted. And when you say, I have more time, or there is a tomorrow, or there is, a year from now, you are taking Allah for granted, Allah's will for granted. And that is qillat adab, that is ill manners with Allah, because you don't know that, and there's no way you can assume that. So here, here it is very similar proposition with a critical difference. When we talked about this before, the emphasis was on action. You don't know if there's a tomorrow. Don't wait until your circumstances to change to take action. Here, remember that the emphasis is on disciplining the student on the path. So how does that make a difference? Well, in the following ways. So the proposition is the same, that assume that this is all the time that you have, and that the circumstances that you're in are the facts of life as they are, and you must act to do your best under the circumstances and not wait. Okay. However, here, this is employed in the concept, in the critical concept of al-muraqabah. And the idea of al-muraqabah, let me just, where did it go? See if I can find the code. Muraqabah is a concept that is taught to the student as they are journeying on this path. There are these critical concepts in the path that are drilled into you. So one of them we already mentioned is al-mushahada, is when you actually have a direct experience of the divine, and an experience that is not mitigated through text negotiated through text or through reason, or a direct perception of futuhat, of illuminations. So another concept that is very important in this process is that concept of muraqabah. And al-muraqabah, they always say al-issa ala qalb li'alla yakhruj min hadrat al-rabb. That's the expression. That you are vigilant in disciplining your heart as you are in your hadra. Remember, we've talked about the concept of al-hadra, and you are sitting in your hadra, and in the hadra, your thought and your ideas are supposed to be consumed by the divine. But your heart, in this, like your mind, will always be drifting. It will always start daydreaming. It will always start thinking of other things. You know, you sit, you're doing your dhikr, and you say, I'm going to only be thinking of my relationship to Allah. But you find your mind drifting. Well, al-muraqabah is precisely this dynamic where you are consistently watching over your heart so that it does not drift away in your state of hadra, in the state of that you are, the time that you are spending in your hadra, in Allah's presence. Okay, one of the biggest challenges in muraqabah is, even if you are the type of person who says, okay, I'm not going to wait tomorrow, I'm going to take action. And as we said, that this is taught as we encountered this principle before, as in norm of life, of Islamic life. Here though, is quite often when human beings think of their circumstances as less than ideal. So they think of themselves as in a state of usr. So their heart will tell them, wait until the state of yusr, which makes them psychologically, makes it difficult for them psychologically to be in a state of muraqabah, to be vigilant when they spend time in their hadra with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they are always waiting for an ideal time to come. So, you know, I was young, I've encountered this with young men especially. I don't know, maybe it's, you tell me if it exists with women. But you know, quite often I'll see young men who say, or feel, they don't say it. They actually, I mean, it's only after knowing them for a long time where they confess it to me, that they're telling themselves, oh, I'm waiting till, you know, I meet the right person and I get married, and then something will happen with my, you know, they're often thinking that this is the point, after marriage is where I'm going to start developing my relationship with Allah. I mean, I don't know if you guys who are married, you know how that usually goes. You know, it never works. It's a fallacy. It's a fiction. If you're going to take your journey with Allah and you're disciplining yourself to think of Allah and nothing but Allah, you must learn to do it while taking your circumstances as is, waiting for a point. Now, in this context, in the context of where Principle 23 is usually employed, what will often happen is students, especially students who come and join a tariqah, and you know this is in lived experience is actually quite frequent, that they will psychologically be not taking their muraqabah seriously until they think that they will be in a better position within the tariqah and closer to the teacher. So they join the tariqah and they tell themselves, well, if I'm first find a comfortable position for myself where I am respected and known and trusted, where right now I have this student annoying me and this student competing with me and this student trying to overshadow me, and this is often where you get your intense lectures, is that you will always, your psychology will always seek after an excuse. You will always hinge taking God seriously on some ideal circumstances that you tell yourself will be fulfilled. And the end result of it, and I've read this and heard this many times, is that you become a hypocrite. You learn, what eventually is that you go from one step to another step, and you've never really, it's sort of like you're cheated your way through without engaging in the substance of this relationship of muraqabah that they, okay. So the way that is often articulated is, I forgot which, it was Imam al-Sahl, a famous Sufi figure, who is asked about the state of muraqabah, because state of muraqabah is a state of hard work. You're constantly, you're watching over yourself, if you get sleepy, you start yawning, that's a big no-no. You have procedures for if you start yawning or if you get sleepy, if your mind starts drifting, some students even slap themselves, or will have a rubber band and they'll snap it to alert themselves, or many different, and you can imagine in pre-modern times or even more painful things that they would do. So Imam al-Sahl is asked, متى يستريح الفقير, meaning, okay, the seeker on the path, at what point is this principle internalized, and at what point you can say that principle 23 has been mastered, and you don't have to constantly worry about the vigilance by which the practice of muraqabah is taken. And Imam al-Sahl responded, إذا لم يرى وقتا غير الوقت الذي هو فيه, that you achieve where you're supposed to go if you always see the ideal time as none other than the time you're in. So you eradicate, you completely erase the idea of, well, I'm waiting for. And, it is hard. This practice is hard, because even after many years, I catch myself still at this age, where I'll catch myself saying, to myself, or my nafs is saying to my nafs, well, wait until you retire. And I know that that's wrong. But my point is that I mean, for mere mortals like myself, it is a dream to reach a point where you've mastered that inclination, that you no longer need to be vigilantly engaged in muraqabah. The other points just that are usually emphasized in the teaching of number 23, and this is actually, maybe I should have talked about this first, that part of the attitude that helps a great deal in successfully achieving what 23 is teaching is internalizing within yourself that ad-dunya, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that ad-dunya daru ibtila, that life on earth is a life of tests and challenges, if not hardships. That is what you should expect. And to expect a time when ibtila will end, to expect a time when challenges will no longer be there, and things will settle down, that there are no more challenges, there are no more hardships. That is, so many people have gone astray because of that. They are waiting for the time when everything settles down, and then they will become, the Muslims they've always wanted to be. They will start on their journey of seeking God or learning Islam or seeking knowledge, and the vast majority of the time what you learn through that is the habit of perpetual postponement and laziness. And you reach the end of your life, and the books that you bought to read are still on the shelves, unread. The things that you told yourself you're going to do, maybe, a lot of Muslims, will eke in an achievement of Hajj or Umrah or something like that. But this is just one of the most common fallacies. You must drill within the realization that it is actually a point of worry for al-mu'min mubtala. The true believer is always tested by Allah. And if challenges and hardships cease in your life, it is actually something to worry about. That maybe God is not happy with you and has given up on you. So far from expecting it, you should tell yourself, the reason I work with what I have today is that I am completely in my conception of reality. I expect this world to constantly be a world of challenges and hardships. And so I know what the challenge of today is. I don't know what the challenge of tomorrow will be. I know what the hardship of today is. I don't know what the hardship of tomorrow will be. And this is part of what is drilled into a student as well. You know, you imagine that the day that you become, I mean, in the case of students, the day that you become a professor and so on, and your life stabilizes, that's when you're going to achieve. You don't know. You know, Allah could put challenges and fitan in your way that make the days when you were a student or the days when you were struggling seem like a dream. You know, and you tell yourself, if only I would go back to the good old days. You just don't know. And part of that, of course, is what teaches you sabr, perseverance and patience. Because if your expectation is the world and challenges and hardships and an opportunity for you to draw closer to Allah, because all hardships and on this earth improve your position in the hereafter. It's a different attitude and a different way of seeing life and the challenges of life. Yeah, there is, maybe this is a bit too advanced, but I have a feeling that if I skip it, the powers that be will be mad at me. Yeah, the powers that be, you know, basically, yeah. The boogeyman. In this field, they talk about when you learn al-muraqabah and the whole pedagogy of al-muraqabah. You talk. There is muraqabat al-ruh. Sorry, muraqabat al-qalb, muraqabat al-ruh, and muraqabat as-sirr. So three levels or three categories. Muraqabah, as we said, is the vigilance in being in constantly, especially when you are in the hadra, in staying focused, not drifting, not so on and so forth. So muraqabat al-qalb is as we explained, is the muraqabah of the heart is teaching yourself not to drift, not to become distracted, not to daydream. So it is that particular practice. When they talk about muraqabat al-ruh, this is more challenging because muraqabat al-ruh is where you vigilantly, ruh means spirit, right? So it's not the muraqabah of the heart, but the muraqabah of the spirit, is where you are vigilantly maintaining a disciplined, ordered engagement with maqam al-shuhud, with seeking that stage where your experience with the divine is direct and unmitigated. Why is this harder? Because you could be doing dhikr. Let's imagine that you are doing dhikr for a month, You're doing this 6 months. You're doing this for a year. And you haven't had an experience of shuhud. What happens is doubt starts seeping in. A sense of unworthiness starts seeping in. All types of crises, boredom starts seeping in. Fatigue starts seeping in. And learning to persevere and to overcome not distractions, not just, daydreaming, but vigilance in staying the course and internalizing what we talked about, that every person has their own path. Some people might have maqam al-shuhud in 1 day. Another person might have maqam al-shuhud in a year. Only Allah knows the why. And part of your relationship with Allah and al-mu'anasa billah, that you're learning to be in the company of your Lord, is to trust Allah and not question why this person, and it has nothing to do with status or prestige, and it's lethal if you allow yourself I've done it in 1 day. If that seeps in, that's demonic, and that will take all the barakah, all the blessing from you, and you'll be left with nothing. I mean, this is experienced, witnessed, testified to a million times. So the first is maqam al-muraqab, state of muraqabah, muraqabat al-qalb, muraqabat al-ruh. And then the third is muraqabat al-sir. Muraqabat al-sir is the same like muraqabat al-ruh, but it's not that you are the practices towards maqam al-shuhud, but the abiding by and the adhering to the adab that we're learning in maqam al-taraqi, as you are seeking to elevate from one state to another. Because as we go through the adab, you will start noticing that these are a lot of rules, and they require internalization, that they must become like second nature to you. It cannot be that you meet a situation and say, oh, let me think, okay, this is number 23, and but they become internal to you. The way that happens is through a program of learning of the adab and internalizing the adab. It is not memorization, although in Islamic history, tons of students memorized the entire adab and could recite them by heart. I can't. But it is the internalization of the adab through reciting of awrad, a wird. The wird is like a poetry that incorporates all the adab, but in a form of 50 verses of poetry, and you recite that as a wird, and they act like cliff notes for the adab. But that's just one example of muraqabat al-sir. There are many others, but many other things. But if you have a good teacher, the teacher will break down your exercises into muraqabat al-qalb, muraqabat al-ruh, muraqabat al-sir. Now, of course, as you would probably expect, you don't get into the exercises of muraqabat al-ruh for a while. You start out with muraqabat al-qalb, then you move on to both the exercises for muraqabat al-qalb and muraqabat al-sir, And then you get to a point where you do the exercises for, or you add, not replace, but you add muraqabat ruh, because then you get into the plane of maqam al-shuhud. Did I confuse anyone, or did I explain this well? No one is confused? How about guys online? Okay, all right. I mean, it's hard to not use the Arabic terms because, I mean, that's where whether even if you go, if you're in the Turkish tariqah, let's say, you still use the same terminology. So it's, you know, these are or if you are in tariqah in India or you know, you still use the same terminology. And they haven't, you know, there are no common language used in English for these terms. I mean, Sufism in the Western world, if it exists authentically, and it often is not authentic, it is often like Buddhism in the West or Hinduism in the West. It's watered down and turned into something sort of, in my humble view, something superficial and fake for Western consumption. But if you know, if Sufism in a genuine sense in the West is still a very young phenomena, and you know, it still has a long way before it becomes institutionally anchored and so on. Okay, alhamdulillah, we finished 3 aphorisms, not 2. Progress, alhamdulillah, we're having progress. Okay, so next halaqah inshallah we'll start with number 24, and as usual, come do the honors of closing the proceedings. Let's hear about who we ate now.
Alhamdulillah, thank you very much, Sheikh. Everyone, just please, as a request, let's all make dua for Joe that he's able to process, understand, and internalize these lessons. We know how much he struggles, especially now that he's in the UK and that he doesn't have me as a mentor and role model anymore. I have a sense that he's been drifting. So,
He's back, alhamdulillah.
But yeah, inshallah also, Grace will be back next week, and if not, we will circle a petition, rally the troops, put pressure, do whatever we can to get her back, because, yeah.
Yeah.
Inshallah. That's the official end.
What did she say?
Let me see.
Please don't eat fish.
Yeah, no, she said please don't eat shit.
Oh, yeah.
No, inshallah, I won't come to that. We'll start with Tariq first. And I think that should hold this over until you get back.
Okay. All right, guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.